Every year since my niece and nephew were born, I've gifted them a book. Either one that I loved as a child, like Chicka Chicka Boom Boom and Corduroy, or one that I found as an adult that tells a story that delights me. A few years ago, I got my nephew a book that's since become my go-to baby gift. It's called Bodies Are Cool. I've read it to him countless times, and now I do the same with my 4-year-old niece, Mira.
Soft tummies, saggy tummies, flat or sticky outy tummies, innies, outies, pregnant tummies. Bodies are cool. What do you think about your tummy?
It's brown.
It's brown. And?
A belly button.
And it has a belly button.
Yeah.
This body, that body, his and her and their body. However you define your body, bodies
Are cool.
As adults, our relationships with our own bodies are at once abstract, fraught, and politicized. But picture books offer a space where we can meet our bodies with joy and curiosity and impart those sentiments to the next generation. I'm Anita Rao, and this is Embodied, our show tackling sex, relationships, and your health. Teaching kids to think in nuanced ways about bodies and how they work is an art. It involves careful attention to words, illustrations, and all the blank space in between. So how exactly do children's book writers do that? We're going to get into those details today, starting with author and illustrator Tyler Fetter. She's behind the book Bodies Are Cool. Hey, Tyler, welcome to Embodied.
Thank you so much for having me.
So listeners were just able to hear a bit of the text of Bodies Are Cool through me reading to my niece, but I just want to kind of describe the visual spectacle of this book. Each page is filled with bodies of all shapes, sizes, skin tones, hair colors, abilities, and there's so much detail that you've added to each one. It really speaks to, I think, the wonder that you were trying to evoke with this book. You came to it as an early 30-something illustrator, but you were trying to capture a feeling that you had as a kid. Can you talk to me about those memories of wonder about the body?
Yeah. So I was born in 1989. So the majority of my adolescence was like late 90s, early 2000s, like peak diet culture.
Same, yes.
Size zero explosion. But then I think about this little sliver of time before I got all those messages and how I just didn't have any negative feelings about bodies, about my body or anyone else's body. I have this memory that I talk about a lot where I was up early one morning in the basement with my dad and he was working out, just like doing sit-ups and walking on a treadmill and stuff. And he told me that he wanted his stomach to be hard. I just have this memory of thinking, like, why would you not want to be soft? And like remembering that now is so jarring because it's so automatic to not want to be soft given all the messages that we get everywhere. But kids don't feel that way yet until they hear it from somewhere else.
They really don't. And I think, in asking that question to my niece, like, what do you notice? It's like, oh, what do I notice? Like, and it's all very kind of neutral. Like, it looks this way. It feels this way. It has this softness. And I know that you reached out to a bunch of people on Instagram before you wrote this book. You asked people, what are the parts of your body that you learned to love when you were little? Talk to me about what you heard and what your takeaway was from those messages.
Yeah. So actually, I asked people what body parts they wished that they had learned to love when they were little.
Okay, that's a key difference. Okay.
It was really jarring, the responses. People are just so eager to talk about the parts of themselves that they didn't like. And it made me so sad. And I read through them and I compiled them into a big list that I categorized. So I put like all the hair stuff in one and all the skin stuff in another. It was like any possible way a person can look, people feel bad about it. And I wanted little kids to see all those different ways a person can look and just be excited about them.
So you took a very kind of meticulous and specific approach to the depiction of bodies in this book. And I think every single time that I read it, I notice something new. There's like a kid in the corner who has a colostomy bag. And I want to hear about how you figured out about the bodies that you were going to depict. I know there was a spreadsheet involved. So tell me about this spreadsheet.
There was. This spreadsheet was very short-lived because it very quickly became unmanageable because there were like a billion columns and a billion rows. But basically what I wanted was to have a lot of diversity on each spread, but I also wanted to have diversity through the whole book. So I didn't want it to be like every person who uses a cane is white. I wanted to have each person with a cane looks different. It was like the most challenging part of the book, really, was to just try to like make sure that each person was really distinct from each other person.
When you were in the thick of it, is there something that you remember kind of like control Fing for in your spreadsheet to be like, did I represent this? Like anything that stands out that you were kind of really meticulous about at the end?
I'm trying to think. I do remember at the end, before I turned in the art, I went back and looked at that big master sheet of all of the people's responses from Instagram. And there was one category that was like moles and scars and freckles and all that stuff. And I went through the book and I put all of them in there. I was like sprinkling beauty marks on everyone.
I love that.
Yeah, it was fun.
The word choice is really powerful in children's books. And there is one word in particular that comes up in Bodies Are Cool that stands out to me when I'm sharing it with my niece and nephew because I'm so aware of how infrequently the word fat and fatness is kind of named in kids' books in any way or in a way that is kind of neutral. Can you talk to me about how you use it in your book and the kind of conversations that you're hoping to start by using it the way that you do?
Yeah, so I have been in the like body positive fat liberation kind of space on social media for many years now, and I've learned a lot. And I think that a lot of people in larger bodies are reclaiming the word fat that has previously been used as just an insult. People think fat and they think gluttonous or lazy or ugly, but none of those are part of the actual definition of the word. The word is just a neutral thing, the same as tall or short. And so I wanted to just present it in the book in a way that was like not super drawing attention to itself. Like it's not like there's a page that's all about fatness, but to just put it in there as like that's just one way of being, and it doesn't have to be a negative thing. It can be a neutral thing or a beautiful thing, just like any other kind of body.
There is a really sing-songy quality to this book, or at least that's how it feels when I'm reading it. And I'm curious about how that and kind of other style elements evolve throughout the feedback and editing process. Like, did you get any notes on what kind of style would help the message resonate or stick with kids?
The sing-songy thing kind of just came out of nowhere. I like knew the general idea that I wanted the book to have. The rhythmy thing popped into my head one day. So I have two younger sisters, and when we were little, my mom used to sit in the hallway between our rooms and read books to us before bed.
Oh, I love that.
And there was this one book that she read to us so often that had a similar sing-songy quality that I found out later that she wasn't even reading from the book anymore. She had just memorized it. And I really love that idea that it's kind of like a song. It's like a message that is fun to remember and can stick in people's heads even when they're not looking at the page.
So this combination of kind of words that describe particular bodies and name that they exist while also celebrating a wide diversity of bodies. I want to ask you about that because I had this interesting experience with your book. I was with my nephew and we were at a coffee shop, I think, and there was someone there who used a ventilator. And my nephew was kind of loudly commenting to me, like asking about the ventilator and pointing out what it was. And I remember that my immediate instinct was sort of like, shh, no, like we don't talk about other people's bodies. Like we don't comment about other people's bodies. And then I was like, wait a second. I literally bought you a book that I read to you that says like this body, that body, bodies are cool. So I'm curious about how you think about the role of the book in these kind of real life moments where we're navigating social mores around what and how to comment about someone else's body.
I have gotten a lot of messages from parents and caretakers who have said that they sort of use the book as a way for their kids to get all their staring out so that they don't do it in public because there's so many types of bodies in the book that maybe kids haven't seen before. But in terms of like actually saying something in person, I think what I'm hoping people get from the book is to sort of keep bringing it back to like, yeah, all bodies are different. And having that be kind of like a neutral to positive place to bring the conversation back to. So even if the kid is saying like, you know, why does that person use a wheelchair or whatever, you can say like different people's bodies move in different ways and like that person rolls because all bodies are different and bodies are cool. It's like a pretty simple, basic message, but it's really intended for like super little kids. And I think if they hear it enough, it'll just become a part of how they understand the world.
Having access to neutral language about your body at a young age is so important, especially because negativity and self-consciousness can start really early. So how do you meet a kid at that moment of first noticing differences between their bodies and others and help them reframe it as something positive? An author who writes with young brown kids in mind will help us answer that question right after the break. Please stay with us. There's a feeling we talk a lot about on this show when you finally get clarity about something you've been experiencing in your body your whole life, and suddenly everything makes more sense. I have a podcast recommendation for you that dives deep into this exact feeling. It's a new show called Climbing the Walls. It's from the perspective of a science journalist who lived much of her life feeling like she was constantly falling short until she got an ADHD diagnosis at age 36. Daniel Elliott joined a cohort that's grown exponentially in the past few years, adult women with ADHD. She brings her reporting chops to the questions, why women, why now? And how has this underdiagnosis affected women's mental health? Climbing the Walls is produced by Understood.org, a nonprofit dedicated to supporting people with learning differences like ADHD and dyslexia. To listen to Climbing the Walls, search for Climbing the Walls in your podcast app. That's Climbing the Walls. This is Embodied. I'm Anita Rao. Children's books may be easy to read, but writing a good one is not so simple. Today, we are talking about how authors and illustrators create children's books specifically about bodies and what it's like to distill complex ideas into messages that kids can understand. Like how to make sense of a moment when someone points out something about your body that's different, which is what a little girl named Laxmi experiences in the book Laxmi's Mooch.
Hi, I'm Laxmi. Come here, closer. You see that? That's my mooch. What's a mooch, you ask? These little hairs above my lip. It's okay. You can look.
Spoiler alert, Laxmi learns to love her mooch even after some kids make her feel self-conscious about it. Here to talk about writing that story is author Shelly Anand. Shelly, welcome to Embodied.
Thanks so much for having me.
So we've been talking with Tyler about writing to kids when they're at this stage of noticing differences between their bodies and other people's bodies for the first time. And I know that a real life example of that is in part what inspired Laxmi's Mooch. So can you tell me that story that started you on the path to writing the book?
Yeah, absolutely. So I have two kids, boy and a girl, ages 10 and 7. And so when my daughter, my second child, was born, I was on maternity leave. And a friend of mine called me and said her daughter, and this is another South Asian mother, raising a hairy brown child in the South. And she called me though, because her daughter was only 6 and she came home crying because someone had made fun of her mustache. And I was instantly flooded with memories of, my own kind of shame around my body hair. The first time I got teased, I think I was older. I was in 5th grade. So I think I was taken aback that as young as 6 years old now, this young girl was made to feel self-conscious. And I looked down at my daughter who, is biracial. My husband's white and I'm Indian, but she definitely inherited my hairiness. And I really wanted something different for my friend's daughter and for my daughter and for all the hairy girls and kids out there, because the journey of hair removal, what I've found with the book coming out, it's a very traumatic thing. My mother, as a young immigrant, would put, bleach on my hair, on my face, and I would break out in rashes. And I was like, why are you turning my hair blonde? That doesn't make sense to me. And why is this itching so bad? And then just, years of waxing and threading and all these things. And, wanting to imagine a world where rather than shame or embarrassment, kids could, kind of like what Tyler was talking about, have like a sense of wonder or excitement even about like bodies are cool. And so I think the experience of writing the book and having it out in the world now for over 3 years has been really amazing, because I have parents and children and adults from all over the world, adults messaging me, I wish I had this book when I was growing up, but then caretakers of young children sharing with me that, hey, I read your book and this little girl or this little boy got excited about the fact that they have arm hair or that they have leg hair. And so that first time that they're recognizing their body hair being a point of like excitement rather than shame, I didn't even know that was a possibility when I wrote the book. It was something I aspired to, but I didn't know if it would work. And it's been really, really cool to hear the response from people from all walks of life and all backgrounds kind of talk about how healing the book has been. And it was certainly healing for me to write it and, share
Well,
it.
I love what you're mentioning there about that, like kind of drilling it down to what the core concept is or the core message that you want to be able to impart with a kid. But I think one of the challenges and something I've noticed as I've kind of picked up various kids' books is like there is an art from taking that core message into one that makes sense for an adult and making it make sense for a kid. And it's not as simple as like, oh, just use plain language. Like it is a very intense process of iteration and workshopping. And I know that you had a full kind of view of that because this was your first book and you went into it, maybe with ideas about children's books like what you grew up reading in the 90s, like I did, the Bernstein Bears, which were very, very word dense and very like Mama Bear does this and that means this. But books today are not quite like that. So I'd love to know kind of how you turned your initial concept into one that fit the publishing standards of today.
Yeah. So when the idea for Lakshmi came to me, I was really, trying to think for this young girl, like, okay, who do we have out there, right? Women with mustaches, if you will. Obviously, Frida Kahlo came to mind, but also just thinking about, women from the subcontinent, women from Iran, from Persia, and how there were hairier women. And so that line in the book about us hairy women coming from a tradition of hairiness, including Mughal empresses and stately Ranis, like all of these different types of people having body hair. That was kind of the first, almost whatever, if you want to call it a stanza or lines that kind of came to me as I was ideating on the book. So my agent, Sabah Suleiman with Talcott Notch Literary, her and I went to college together. And so I reached out to her about the idea and about, everything that I had witnessed my friend's daughter go through. And she herself is a mother. And she's like, Shelly, if you're really serious about this, go to the library and read how picture books are written today. And so that's what I did. I went to the library and I only checked out books that were published, after maybe 2014, 2015 on a whole range of topics, but, books having to do with difference or bullying to kind of see how they were written. And then actually there's a picture book author named Joshua Funk. And he has this really cool guide on his website called How to Write a Picture Book. And he basically talks about this almost like a formula, if you will, of like how picture books are written these days. And so like the word count is smaller. So it's around 500 words is the number. It can vary. And then, yeah, kind of thinking about taking out those things. Like, do I need to say I have a pink backpack? Is it a part of the story, or is the illustration going to show that?
Yes.
And so when I first wrote Lakshmi, it was definitely like Bernstein Bears, Dora the Explorer. Like, I'm walking to school and I have, new shoes on and all of those things. And so there were a lot of evolutions of the draft. And I worked on it for like maybe 8 or 9 months. And then my agent, or she wasn't my agent then, she's like, okay, wow, you put a lot of work into this. And we started having a back and forth, and she ended up taking me on. But then when we were ready to go on submission to publishers, a lot of the editors had a lot of different reactions to the book and the way it was originally written.
I want you to talk about one of those pieces of feedback, because I think there's one that will take us in an interesting direction, which is a piece of feedback about the bullying in the book being too harsh for the age range. I'd love to know a little bit more about that and how you ended up kind of shifting the message of the book with that critique.
Yeah, I think I'll be honest, like when I first wrote the book, I think for me, I mean, I've always loved writing, I've always loved reading, but I didn't imagine myself becoming a picture book author. But then I saw a need for a very specific book about girls with mustaches.
Yes.
But I think there was like a kind of release or catharsis I needed to go through from like being a hairy brown girl in Georgia my whole life and the bullying I endured. And so in the original iteration, Lakshmi's friend Zoe isn't as nice as she is in the final version of the book, and she's more teasing and more like making fun rather than pointing out. And yeah, the responses I got were either, she was too self-conscious about her body hair, or the bullying was too intense. And my response to that was, how many of the editors that said she's too self-conscious, have children, currently have children, that are in kindergarten right now and know what it's like to be raising, a young child at this time. And then my other question was, how many of the people that said the bullying was too intense are people of color versus not? And so by and large, the people that said she was too self-conscious, didn't have kids. And what I was noticing as a young mom and as an auntie in, my community is that children were becoming more self-conscious at a younger age than we were. And then the folks that were saying that the bullying was too intense, they were mostly white. And so they didn't really know the experience of what it's like to be a person of color and to be bullied and teased for the way that you look or the way that you don't have proximity to whiteness and how you're not meeting those standards. And, my agent, Sabah, was very, very supportive and like, this is your story. So if like, you don't have to take this feedback that you're getting. But I really sat with it, and I wanted also there to be some reconciliation between, I didn't want to vilify the girl who was like, hey, you have a mustache. Like I didn't want, and I think you were talking about this earlier with Tyler, like how children inevitably are going to say, hey, that person has a ventilator, or hey, that girl has a mustache. Like there's just no way around it. Like that's going to happen. And so what's the way to do it? Right? Like it's not to say, you have a mustache, like you look like a man, but it's like a curiosity, like, oh, you should be a cat because you have whiskers, and like a playfulness to it. And so that idea came to me as I was like, I was just trying to think of a situation like, okay, if I'm a 6-year-old or I'm a 5-year-old, how would my mustache come up in conversation?
I love that.
And then it went from there. And so those were the kind of guideposts that kind of helped me. But I think I still stayed true to the sentiment and what I wanted to get across. And I know some people really enjoy the fact that she's able to, point out to her friend Zoe, like, hey, you have a much too, it's just blonde. So I think those are things that we did to kind of balance it out.
And I think it gets to the fact that kids have like a playful sensibility and a playful orientation toward the world. And Tyler, I want to bring you back in here because I know that you think a lot about humor. I know you're a comedy lover. You did some training at Second City, I think, even, which is awesome. And I want to know about how you think about kind of tapping into humor in your writing for kids and how that can be a tool to kind of invite some new kinds of curiosity.
Yeah, I feel like silliness is just like the magic potion that can like cut through anything. There are so many difficult things that my family has gone through that we're able to laugh about, and it makes it so much easier and sort of like lowers the barrier to entry for the conversation. So yeah, I think like bringing in a little bit of laughter or whimsy, it makes kids more interested also in learning about something than if they feel like they're being preached to.
Completely. Yeah, there's that fine line between inviting them in and making them feel like they're being, beat over the head with a particular message. And you also kind of went through an editorial process. You invited sensitivity readers to look at your book. You had 3 different readers, I think, one for race, one for disability, one for trans representation. And I'd love to know about anything that those readers told you, any feedback that you got that informed a direction that you took with the book.
Yeah, something that was really cool for me was with the disability sensitivity reader who was autistic and had all these cool ideas about how to incorporate autistic characters into the book. And like one might think of autism as an invisible disability. So, like, how would you include that in a picture book? But there were all these cool ideas about, like, on the spread about body hair, there's a little kid who's like arranging a bunch of leaves on the ground
Oh,
in a
wow.
special pattern because they said that these repetitive patterns can be really comforting for autistic people. There's also like on the hands page, one of the adult hands is drawing a repeating pattern, and that was their idea. And they showed me how to like make sure people's wheelchairs like fit them properly. Like at first I had one where they were like, that person's ankles would hurt because the little pedals that their feet go on are at the wrong height. So this is stuff that like there's no way that I would have known even with all my best intentions going into it. So I just think sensitivity reader is like the coolest, most helpful job. I appreciated it so much.
It's also a great example of, the story that the images tell that the words don't explicitly. Like you don't explicitly name, there are autistic bodies and neurodivergent bodies, but you're showing that through the bodies that you illustrate. And I'm curious about like how you think about the artistic depiction of bodies when you are just in the role of illustrator. You recently did 2 companion books called All About Vulvas and Vaginas and All About Penises. And you didn't write these books. They were written by sex educators. But as you illustrated, like I'd love to know how you thought about how you wanted to approach body representation through your images.
Yeah, that process had a whole other layer of complexity that I didn't have to tackle with Bodies Are Cool. You know, showing private parts is something that's complicated on its own. And then for it to be a children's book, there was a lot of care that we had to put in place. But overall, the attitude I have is very similar of just like how many different types of people can I fit in this book? And there's no need for every person to have straight hair or to, it's a book about private parts. It's not about mobility. So why should someone be in a wheelchair? But it's because there are people with wheelchairs and they have
Yeah.
private parts too.
Yeah.
So yeah, I just tried to like include anything that I could where it would fit and not distract from the story, which I don't think it should.
Yeah. Well, I'd love to end there with you, Shelly, on that line between like entertaining and distracting. And maybe as a parent, as you read books to your kids and you think about kind of children's literature, what is that kind of subtlety in style and form in picture books that you think kind of opens the door for a kid or closes it?
I mean, I think it really depends on the story and the kid and what you're trying to convey. I think there are different forms of getting kids roped in and getting them interested in a topic and getting them to relate to a book. I do think that being able to see yourself or see people that look like you or look like people you know is important, but then also depicting all sorts of life experiences so that kids can have exposure and can, ask questions and know that not a single topic is off limits, right? So I have both of Tyler's books on that she illustrated that I've shared with my kids, as someone who was not raised in a sex positive household and trying to do that. And so being able to have, a book about penises and vaginas that I'm reading with my kids and they can like look at it and ask questions. And, I think those are really, really important tools, not only for kids, but for parents and educators to be able to have conversations that have historically or culturally been really, really difficult to have. And so I think finding thoughtful ways that, allow kids to explore and be curious, I think helps. And I know Tyler brought up, kids not wanting to be lectured at. I think that is an important piece of it. And that's something I struggle with sometimes too, as a writer. That's also in a parent role. And a lot of the books I write are about topics that I think are important with messages I want to convey to my kids and others. But that balance between it being a narrative and like the child discovering something for themselves versus, having some sort of adult figure come into the narrative and provide some sort of support versus something that's more poetic and lyrical. It just depends on the story and what works and what doesn't work. And that's where it's important to get, feedback from readers, sensitivity readers, but also kids and other parents. It's all part of the process. And so, I'm trying to write a book about partition, for example. I'm the granddaughter of partition refugees. And, my kids know that there's this event that happened in 1947 that really impacted our family. It's relating to what's happening in the world today in Palestine and all of these things. And so, but how do you convey a topic like that to a child, right? And so those are the things you have to kind of explore. You don't want to have a book about a grandmother sobbing and telling you the story about partition. I think that's a reality of how many of us heard about it, but how do we reach, the masses of not just those directly impacted, but others that might not know about the topic that they're reading about.
Shelly and Tyler both write from a place that acknowledges that kids understand so much more than what we're giving them credit for. And in the process of refining and honing the messages in their children's books, they've also found ways to heal their own body wounds. I'll ask them both about that after the break, when we'll also touch on how their work is affected by book bans and the current politics around children's literature. Stay tuned.
This is Tanya Mosley, co-host of Fresh Air. You'll see your favorite actors, directors, and comedians on late-night TV shows or YouTube. But what you get with Fresh Air is a deep dive. Spend some quality time with people like Billie Eilish, Questlove, Ariana Grande, Stephen Colbert, and so many more. We ask questions you won't hear asked anywhere else. Listen to the Fresh Air podcast from NPR and WHYY.
This is Embodied. I'm Anita Rao. How do picture books teach kids about their bodies? That's the question we've been talking about today with authors Tyler Feder and Shelly Anand. They've taken us behind the scenes on idea formation, parsing the roles of art and illustration, and the editing process. Now we are going to explore how these messages have landed with both kids and adults, and what this might mean for the future of kids' books about bodies. So, Shelly, I want to talk with you about the character of Lakshmi's mom in the book. And this is one that you said you struggled a bit with writing, how you wanted to convey her relationship with her body. And I'd love for you to talk a bit about that with us, because how our parents talk about their bodies informs how we think about our bodies when we're young kids. And I know that was on your mind when you were writing this book.
Yeah, exactly. I think Lakshmi's mother, I haven't encountered, or maybe I have encountered someone like her, but it wasn't modeled when I was growing up to have someone who is like, yeah, I have a much, like, so what? That definitely was not the attitude with my mother and, all the aunties and, family, both here in the US and back in India. And so, but wanting to have a model of like what kind of parent I want to be, right? I grew up in a home where there was anxiety and fear around appearance growing up in, as the daughter of immigrants and being in a majority white culture and not looking like, the girls on TV. And then also there is a lot of fat phobia and body negativity, if you will, and just so it's so pervasive in our society, but it's also very specifically a part of South Asian culture that's not really talked about, or I think it's starting to be talked about more. And when I had my kids, I instantly knew that how I behaved and talked about myself was going to impact the way my children viewed and talked about their bodies. Mm-hmm. And so I felt this weight of responsibility. And these are habits that die hard, the body negativity, like saying negative things, wanting to change things about your body. It becomes like this constant refrain that actually, if you do it for so long, it's very hard to unlearn. And so I think there was like this unlearning process I was doing. And so when I was imagining writing about Lakshmi's mom, I was like, okay, what kind of mom would I want to be if I had my kid come home and complain about their hair or, be embarrassed about their body hair? And so imagining a mother who doesn't remove her hair and is like, so what? That was kind of what I was trying to explore. And it actually ended up happening for me for a whole slew of reasons. Laxmi's Mooch came out in March of 2021 during the pandemic. And so I had not gotten my eyebrows or my much removed in months and weeks. And so the book actually kind of helped me into this place of my own body hair acceptance.
I love that.
To the point that even my daughter would, if she sees me shaving my legs, she's like, you shouldn't do that. It makes your hair prickly. If you don't shave it, it stays nice and soft. Like it just completely changed the way we talk about body hair. And with the second book, I Love My Body Because, same thing, having this like refrain of that, it does help me. It does help me in those moments where I have been taught that so many people and women especially have been taught to not like our bodies. Having gratitude for this vessel that is carrying me through this life, this vessel that has given life, kind of ideating on what an ideal situation would be, environment would be. And then, and I'm not perfect. There are days where I'm like, I hate my body because like I'm human, but it still is a way. I think the books that Tyler has written and I've written and so many other authors have written that are in this space are not just for the children. They're for us too, for us to do that healing work, to heal our inner child and to bring back that sense of wonder and acceptance and, create the adults and the people in our lives where we can have honest conversations about respecting and loving ourselves.
Tyler, what has that adult journey been like for you and your two adult sisters upon, reflecting on this book, engaging with kind of the adult versions of this message?
Yeah, it's been a real journey. My two sisters and I have all dealt with varying levels of eating disorders over the years. My middle sister has been in and out of inpatient treatment centers for like a decade. And so we've spent a lot of time as a family kind of working through this stuff together. And it's pretty cool to see how the three of us who grew up in this very body negative culture have all really pivoted to this like positive, accepting space. And now it's really noticeable how generational of an issue this can be.
Yeah.
When I was working on the book, I showed it to my grandma, who was like in her late 80s, maybe at the time, who thinks that I'm the greatest person in the world. She's
Aw.
very, very effusive, just in as a, as a grandma. But I showed her the book and she was looking through it and she was like, this person needs to lose weight. Like, what's that person doing? And I'm like, oh my God, you have so much compassion for me as a person. But when you're thinking about bodies in general, these are fictional people and you're still having all these opinions about them. So it's been cool since the book came out to hear from readers, or I should say parents who have been reading the books to their kids. They will often tell me that they'll overhear their parents, so the kids' grandparents, reading the books to them. And it's cool for them to hear their like baby boomer parents talking about how all kinds of bodies are great.
I love that.
I'm really hoping that that's an impact that continues to happen.
Do you have the internal narrative of bodies are cool for yourself? Like, have you gotten to that point?
Ooh, that's the goal every day. I can't say that I'm always in that space. I think for me, it's always easier to accept other people's bodies and their differences than it is to accept my own. But I'm definitely at the point now where, like, when I have those negative feelings about my body, there's like space in my brain where I can kind of separate them from myself and be like, these are messages that I've gotten and the messages are wrong. But it makes sense that I feel this way because I've been hearing it my whole life.
Yeah.
But it doesn't have to keep being like this.
I want to bring you both to this moment that we are in right now in children's literature and in American culture. There are book bans happening around the country. Tyler, your book has been flagged for possible removal under some state laws about book bans. It was formally banned in the fall of 2022 from a school district in Texas. So I want to hear you both kind of talking about what's at stake for young readers as books like these get banned. And Tyler, since we're talking about your book being flagged, let me start with you.
Sure. So the main thing that people have an issue with in my book is that I show adults with top surgery scars. That's the big scandal, that there are people with scars on their bodies. It's really hard to empathize, I have to say, with these people who are so scandalized by the idea of their kid seeing a person who they would see in real life anyway. It makes me sad that they think there's something inherently sexual or dangerous about kids just seeing clothed bodies. And I feel like there are probably always going to be people who feel like that and who push back against books that are trying to have this message that's maybe different from what we've seen in the past. I think for me, I try to focus more on the people who kind of fall in the middle ground, almost like undecided voters. Like if there are people who are just like, fat people are bad, trans people are bad, blah, blah, blah. Like, I think those people are wrong, but also it's very unlikely that they're going to be swayed by a cute children's book. But for the people who are in the middle, where they have a little bit more potential flexibility in their thought processes, I think that's where I'm hoping that we can move the needle a little bit.
I love where you took us with that answer. And Shelly, I want to pose that same question to you. Like, is there a version of a family in the middle or folks in the middle who are kind of at this intersection of how they're thinking about difference, how they're talking to kids about their bodies that you're hoping to speak to?
I guess I really think about writing for and about brown kids or the kids that are in my life. And so many of the books that, I had growing up, or the figures I had of, South Asian representation was Apu by Hank Azaria on The Simpsons, right? And so I think I'm really about starting the process of like dismantling these really insidious and kind of dangerous messages that are born in supremacy, like body positivity or fat liberation, is born out of a lot of intersectional issues, like having to do with anti-Blackness, right? There's this book called Fearing the Black Body that talks about kind of the origins of fat phobia being tied to white supremacy and differentiating white women's bodies, particularly from Black bodies. And so I think there is the book bans are tied in with other kind of forms of legislation having to do with reproductive health, having to do with access to healthcare for transgender folks. And it's these forces that want to maintain supremacy culture. And so I'm more interested in the children, right? I'm more worried about the transgender child whose maybe family isn't supportive of them figuring out their identity, being able to go to a library, which is a safe haven, to get access to information that they're not going to get at home or in school. And so it's really about, I think, exposing and giving children some of the fundamental building blocks they have to be kind of critical thinkers and, global citizens in a world that has so many systems of oppression stacked up, not just against them individually, but against, people in the global South and communities that have been, oppressed for generations. If we can bring parents along on that journey, awesome. But I think for me, it's not so much about convincing, it's about like it needing to be there.
Yeah.
Because people, if there's a person out there who is, a Black transgender person in a wheelchair and that bothers you, like that's a you problem. Like that doesn't need to be everyone else's problem. And making sure that we're humanizing every single person. I mean, when I think about book bans, I'm also thinking about this moment that's unfolding with the genocide. And I did an event with Hannah Mushabek, and her book is called Homeland, and it's about Palestine. And her book has been removed from shelves across the country and erasing an entire people, right? And there are a lot of insidious forces out there that want to make sure we erase people that don't conform to what we think, whatever traditional forms of beauty or gender or whatever it may be, they want to erase those signs, and that's a form of oppression. And so the book bans are just along with that, And so I think it's a symbol of, very, very scary, problematic fascist regimes that are doing these things, and we should be very, very concerned about it.
Tyler, I'd love to end with you on kind of positioning where you think the publishing industry for kids' literature sits in this conversation. I know that for a long time there have not been a ton of diverse characters in children's books, a lot of opportunities for diverse writers to write their own stories. That has shifted slowly, but I'd be curious to know kind of what you want to see in this children's literature landscape when it comes to books about bodies and the kinds of bodies that we're talking about.
Yeah, I feel like things are slowly moving in a good direction despite all of the opposition to these kinds of books. I mean, the thought of like being a little kid and getting to read Laxmi's Mooch, I feel like my whole childhood could have been so different. Like I have a mustache. I've had it since I was a little kid. I remember the burning feeling of the bleach laying on the bathroom floor. Like these like little aspects of bodies can make such a big impact. I think maybe like a couple decades ago, there would be books where it's like, you can be Black or white. And they would just like simplify it so intensely that like it's almost doing nothing. And so I am encouraged seeing there be more and more books like these. And in terms of the types of books that are getting banned, I think so many of them are books where kids will learn things. And I think learning is part of what keeps kids safe. And it's so sad to want to take that away. So, you know, despite all of the people who have issues with these kinds of books, it feels to me like the majority are excited. And I even hear that like the books like mine and Shelly's are like not even that like weird to kids. Like I've heard of kids who will see my book and be like, yeah, obviously bodies are all different. Like, who cares?
I love it. They're beyond.
Like, yeah,
they're taking us to another place.
Yeah, that's where I want it to go.
Embodied is a production of North Carolina Public Radio WUNC, a listener-supported station. If you want to lend your support to this podcast, consider a contribution at WUNC.org now. This episode was produced by Kaya Finlay and edited by Amanda Magnus. Nina Scott is our intern, and Jenny Lawson is our technical director. Quilla wrote our theme music. If you have thoughts after listening to this episode, we would love to hear them. Leave us a voice note in our virtual mailbox, SpeakPipe. You can also write us a review and let us know why you listen, or text your favorite episode to a friend. Word of mouth recommendations are the best way to support our podcast. Until next time, I'm Anita Rao, taking on the taboo with you.
Planet Money helps you understand the economy. We find the people at the center of the story.
Garbage in New York, that was like a controlled substance.
We show you how money influences everything.
Tell me what you like by telling me how you spend your money.
And we dig until we get answers.
I had a bad feeling you were going to bring that up.
Planet Money finds out. All you have to do is listen. The Planet Money Podcast from NPR.